Welcome back to Cult Pop. With me is one of my favorite authors, Sherry Priest. Sherry has been on the show before, and we got so much fan response that I just had to have her on again this year. Since we're at Penguicon, we were fortunate enough to be able to grab her again and talk about some of the new novels she's got out. Fathom we discussed a little bit last year, but now it's actually out and we can give you some more information. Those Who Went Remain There Still is a great Subterranean press release. And by the time you folks view this, there's going to be a new novel coming out. So we figured this would be a great time to get Sherry on. So Sherry, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me again.
You know, I just really enjoy talking with you. I'm absolutely just a huge fan of your work. And we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to have you on for the whole show this time. So I want to cover a lot of stuff. And I guess let's just start right now with Fathom, because that's what's out at the bookstores. That's what people can go see on bookshelves, on Amazon, and all that kind of stuff. Just a really great mix of modern fantasy and just all horror and all kinds of stuff going on here. And you know how I like to do it. You tell me what you want to talk about with the book, and as much as comfortable as you are about talking about the book.
Well, all right. I don't know what to tell you exactly.
Well, you know, give us a little synopsis without giving away the whole, the whole thing.
All right. This is my first Florida book, and I'm actually from Florida and kind of sort of raised there. But I wanted to do something set in my home state because everything else had been in Tennessee so far. And there's an island off the Tampa Keys called Anna Maria where I spent a really wonderful spring break in 1998, right before I left college, with a wonderful old abandoned house out by the ocean, and it was all boarded up, and it had a wonderful courtyard with this fountain and just beautiful. And so me and my friends, being the kind to let ourselves into abandoned buildings, had a really good time with it. And it stuck with me all these years, and I decided to write a story about what happened to the house, because we found out through a convoluted series of events that it had never been lived in. It had been built in the 1920s, boarded up, and no one knew what happened. And we later learned that it had belonged to a little old lady who moved away and then eventually died, and then the island bought it, and so now it's been torn down, which is sad. But I don't know, I thought it would be a fun thing to do, and I combined it with, of all the cheesy things in the world, a dream. I had a terrible nightmare about a girl who was turned to stone and mistaken for a statue. So I thought that would be an interesting, I thought it would be nice to put her in that courtyard.
Well, early on in that book, in Fathom, the girl who was turned into a statue is mistaken and ends up being kind of prayed to, mistakenly, really, because she was just there by fault, really. But there's water gods in this. There's all kinds of stuff, different kind of elementals and stuff, cultists. And really, you just touched on a lot of fun, different elements. So there's no, what I really like about a lot of your stories is people try to brand authors nowadays and give them a specific setting, and I really wouldn't know if you call this what you call it, really. Southern Gothic horror with touches of H.P. Lovecraft, and that, you know, you'd have to have about 3 sentences to describe what your work is. So
but it's nice that you included Southern, though. A lot of people don't think of Florida as the South, but Florida thinks of itself as the South.
Sure. Now, the fact that we had discussed off camera that I like a lot. I kind of think of your work when I think very favorably to people like Charles DeLint and things like that, but with a much harder spin and a much darker spin. So that's why I really just enjoy the heck out of your stuff.
Yeah, we have the DeLint quote on the cover even.
Yes, yeah, well, it's Charles, yeah, with the nice quote. But how do you find now, coming from your Eden Moore series, this was kind of a different feel and a different tone. How has the feedback been in regards to?
Actually, this is the best reviewed book I've ever written. We finished doing the Eden Moore series partly because I'd left Tennessee, and I was, by the third one, I was already losing the feel for the city. If you've read Not Flesh Nor Feathers, there's a couple of places where I get email once in a while going, you know that store isn't on that street. You know that's not called Bell South Park anymore. Little things like that. And I felt like I was too far away from it to write mysteries that were set there very concretely. But I hadn't lived in Seattle for very long, and I wasn't real comfortable writing about it either, and so I went, well, I'll go back to Florida. But the feedback on this one has been very good. The other two were more mysteries. This is more of a fantasy adventure. And there's an old legend in Florida, which is almost certainly not true, about a pirate named Gasparilla. He was Gaspar. It's partly almost certainly not true because Gasparilla means like the little guy, or the little Gaspar, the smaller, the younger, and he wouldn't have called himself that, much less a ship. But supposedly dreadful pirate in the Gulf Coast, did terrible, terrible things. And there are all these legends about him. He was probably a marketing gimmick brought up sometime around the turn of the century, but everybody just embraced it and had a wonderful time with it. And now they have a big festival called Gasparilla. And it's basically a big floating con for a few days, and people dress up like pirates and they throw stuff around. And I was thinking, wouldn't that be immensely insulting to that person?
He was really, in the novel, he was absolutely offended by it. And he said, well, some of the stuff is okay, but... And he ended up hijacking the one ship. And
the flagship.
Well, at least it's,
That's pretty.
It's a decent ship. And there were a lot of, he was a pawn of the water god.
Yeah, everybody's a
goddess,
pawn.
I should say. And
well, I wanted to do something wherein the, a lot of the, well, the gods are reasonable and you can negotiate with the gods. And I was thinking, if these are old elementals, you probably can't. They have their own agenda. They have their own plans. And people are just kind of an ends to a mean, if they even need them at all. And I get some complaints about maybe a handful of people here and there dying out of hand. Well, you're talking about ancient deities who have no concern for your personal well-being. And kind of the setup for the book is that the kind of before the fall, if you will. The Genesis says that in the beginning the earth was without form and void. It does not say the earth was not here.
Right.
And there are many cultures that have legends about what was here before the light was separated from the dark. So there was kind of this agreement where the old things would pass away and then new order arrives and everything is good, but some of the old things are still here. And some of them are not terribly happy about that, and they would really love to see the new order come to an end. And they want to do this by awakening the Leviathan. So you have this water entity who is almost a goddess herself, who is trying to awaken her god. And so I wanted her to be just immensely terrible, and then just imagine what she worships.
Right, and because I considered her like a god,
yeah,
but there's
she's terrible,
that she's worshiping, so how bad is that?
But there's this one little guy left between the cracks, and he also needs help. His realm is limited, so he's the one who takes the girl.
He's the shapeshifter.
He's Moss Feaster.
Yeah.
He's a little swamp thing, a little, kind of a desert creature. Well, he's something from between the cracks, and he manipulates decay, and he can preserve things, and he can tear things down, but he can't create things. And he sets some things into motion where he's trying to counteract the Water Witch's plot to destroy the world. And you end up with these human pawns fighting back and forth, kind of caught in the middle of it. And doing some places better than others, but
Well, I think you did an amazing job on this book, and I've got to tell folks at home, go out to your favorite local bookshop, pick it up. If you don't have a close bookshop, go onto Amazon or your favorite internet marketer and pick this book up because it's so worth it. And I read so many nice comments prior to doing the interview about just random people giving their 2 cents about what they've read, and everybody is just so complimentary. But then the real neat thing is exactly what I thought and wanted to bring up here, is that you can't be pigeonholed. And that's what's really neat. That's saying, oh, we loved the Eden Moore series. I was hoping for something like that. This is absolutely nothing like that. But all these readers say, absolutely loved it. This is great. So now I'm going to transition to another book, which is out from Subterranean Press, Those Who Went Remain There Still, and this absolutely a fabulous book.
Way different from that.
Yeah, as far away from this as could possibly be. So this is a real nice collection that's available through Subterranean Press, and if you order through Sub Press, you get a nice chapbook and stuff.
Actually, you can only order through Sub Press now.
Okay, that's
the,
all right.
The original edition has sold out, but there's a limited edition that's still available.
So when you folks are seeing this, I'm sure there'll be even fewer numbers, so make sure you get out there.
He re-released Dreadful Skin. He might re-release this too.
Right, so. Dreadful Skin is still available in a nice trade paperback from Sub Press, so great website.
So if this sells really well, maybe he'll release this one in paperback too.
Now, okay, so Fathom was kind of a 1900s and up.
Yeah, kind of 1920s and 30s.
Now, Those Who Remain There Still, we're going back in history, back into Daniel Boone, all kinds of stuff. Monsters, ghosts, everything, giant flying monsters. Let's talk a little bit about this novel.
Okay, this book, set around the turn of the century. It's actually based on an old family legend that is, because truth is so much weirder than fiction. The Hatfields and the McCoys, the fighting hillbillies, where there were other fighting hillbillies, and the Hatfields and McCoys in Kentucky became very litigious towards the 30s and 40s, and instead a new sample hillbilly for pop culture became the Martins and the Coys. Because that feud had broken up 30, 40 years ago. Nobody even knew what happened to these people. Well, I do, because my grandma was a Coy, and they had moved west and taken up farming in Iowa. But there's a family story that everybody used to tell, and always used to kind of crack me up, where supposedly, if I understand correctly, let's say it that instead, there was this old fellow named Hester Wharton who lived to be nearly 100 years old. My grandfather always said you couldn't kill a Coy, they live forever. I'm sorry, train of thought derailed. So he has 4 daughters. They each married 2 brothers from neighboring families, and so you get the Martins and the Coys, and they fill this valley in several generations, and they hate each other. They feud. Eventually, the feud comes to an end, and the families part. But at some point, Easter Wharton dies, and he owned all the property that everybody lived on. And for some reason or another, the entire family selected 3 representatives to come back to the valley to address the lawyer and the will and all this. And there was a cave. I realize that doesn't seem very connected. It doesn't in the story either, I don't know, but there was a cave, and everyone had to go to this cave and take something out of it, and then everyone would know where all the property went, and it was fine. But instead, bad things happened, and not everyone came out of the cave, and nobody knows what happened. One of the gentlemen who went in may well have been living at Lily Dale in New York. There's one in Florida called Casadega, similar. I get tongue-tied with them. But I talked to them. They were really great. They were very helpful. And he supposedly the next morning his hair had turned white, and he never spoke of it again, and went away and had a good old time. But it's a crazy family legend. And when the very last one of the men who went into the cave died on his deathbed,
and didn't they blow it? Not to interrupt you, but didn't they blow the cave up?
Yeah, they went back and dynamited the cave so no one could ever get in. On this guy's deathbed, they're like, "You must tell us what happened in the cave." And supposedly his last words were, "No, it dies with me."
Right.
And
cue the music.
Right, so nobody knows. And sadly, history has left out the monsters.
And you put them back in.
I thought I would fix that. I have corrected history's terrible oversight in this matter.
Well, I love in the novel how the 2 stories that you're telling to get to the final story, the original
Daniel Boone, yeah.
Daniel Boone and the whole group fighting this monster to begin with in the Terror, that was really good at really getting down to the Terror, and they're sitting around the fire and inching closer and closer because that's the only real protection from this thing that would come over. And
well, supposedly, and again, family lore, don't know if it's true or not, Heaster's father had been with Boone when he cut the Wilderness Road through the Cumberland Gap. We know that some of the men who cut that road were given property in Kentucky, and they think that's how his son ended up with all this property. So yeah, Easter Wharton's father was on the Wilderness Road with the beast in the first place, and so that's the connection there with these 2 guys.
And kind of a neat part of history you put in the novel is that while these sides are squabbling, one of the things that actually brought them
together is Daniel Boone.
Is looking at a stone or a wood, a trunk or something that he had actually inscribed, and so that brought everybody together as opposed to the fighting stopped. And
everybody in Kentucky. Well, Boone, his family was actually from Pennsylvania. He was one of, if I remember correctly, he was either one of 12 or had 12 children, or he was one of 10 and had 12 children. One way or the other. He was one of many. And everybody and their brother knows somebody who's related to a Boone, and lots of people talk about it, but there were lots of Boones. Right before the American Revolution, he actually went surveying for the American government. What they were trying to do was find their way into the brine lakes in the center of Kentucky because they wanted to further westward expansion, but you need to preserve food for that. You need salt, but it was very expensive. And they went, "Oh, but we have brine lakes over there in Kentucky. Unfortunately, there's this mountain range, boo." And they said, "Well, we need somebody who can cut a 200-mile road up through the Cumberland Gap into the heart of Kentucky, and we need it done in under a year." Right. So they go find this 40-some-odd-year-old guy with 10 kids, and they go, hey, Dan, can we talk you into this? What do you need? And he thinks about it for a minute, and he's like, no, give me like 30 guys with axes. And he did it.
And they did it.
But on the way, when he was doing all the surveying work for the government, he would carve his name and initials and things on rocks and trees and whatnot as survey boundaries. And he was not always super consistent with his spelling. He only had a
You said that he was much better at reading than he was.
Well, he seems to have been. Right. A lot of what is known about him was done contemporary biographies by people who'd never met him.
Right.
He was kind of held up as this westward expansionist hero, you know, and most of never happened. But he only had a 3rd grade education, give or take. And he did learn to read, and he liked to read. But you see the old things that he had signed. His penmanship, a little iffy, and his spelling, really iffy. But he was not a stupid man. He was a very, very smart man, and a very charismatic and a very good leader. And I wanted this to be kind of this tough guy who was, you know, in his 40s, and he was a little guy. He was like 5 feet tall. He was not even tall for his day. He was not a big man. But he was very, very good at his job. And everyone in Kentucky loves him. He's the guy.
One of the things I wanted to praise you on, and I think with a lot of your novels, is the fact how much research you do and your love of history as part of your educational background you really bring to a lot of these books. And one of the reasons I really want to recommend this again from the Subterranean Press is that when you order, still available now, my understanding, you get that chapbook, which is a lot of the true history that you just discussed. So that's kind of a heck of a thing. You get this novel plus a chapbook that talks about some of the
about
real
my
history.
aunt going like this,
Crazy.
going woo.
Crazy aunt. But those who went remain there still. Just a fabulous, fabulous book. Pick that up. While you're at the Subterranean Press website, Dreadful Skins Trade is still available. We talked about that a lot the last year when you were here, so we don't need to go more into
the
that.
Irish werewolf hunting nun story.
Yes, which is, I still tell you, one of my favorites. I hope you do something with that character again.
I would like to one day.
Now, we've got some time, so a lot of people know you from the Eden Moore series, and we're going to have a lot of first-time viewers seeing this episode about you. Why don't you talk a little bit about the Eden Moore series, which can still be found out there. 3 novels, critically acclaimed, a lot of fun, more mystery with some gothic horror elements in it, and incredibly popular. So talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. Well, it's a kind of a mystery Southern Gothic series about a biracial Southern woman who sees ghosts, which everybody's like, she sees ghosts. Everybody sees ghosts. So I tried to work local monsters and haunts and legends and things into them. And the first one has to do with an old institution that was outside of Chattanooga called Pine Breeze. And this girl whose mother died there, and terrible things happen, and ghosts follow her, and ghosts help her. But by the end of the book, she's kind of found a new family member and a new friend who it continues through the rest of the series.
That's 4 and 20.
That's 4 and 20 Blackbirds. And the sequel brings up Old Green Eyes from the Chickamauga battlefield. Everybody loves Old Green Eyes. And once in a while, I'll still get an email from somebody going, "Did you know there really is an Old Green Eyes at the battlefield?" Well, yes, I did. I lived there for 12 years, as a matter of fact. Went on to the battlefield at night many a time. So I tried to bring him into it, and Moccasin Bend, also the old state mental health facility built on an Indian burial ground, because how can you write Southern Gothic without including that? And
I really liked the feel. Now, it's been a while since I read that one, but specifically of the horrors of the Civil War, being from up here in Michigan, we don't feel as much of that.
It's kind of different.
A lot of that area is just it was a battlefield and a burial ground.
Tennessee and North Georgia and Virginia, especially the border states, where a lot of the clashes happened. Yeah, and my editor at one point, she's from New York. Somewhere in one of the books, somebody appears with a horn that honks Dixie, and she went, "Now I don't know. Do people still really do things like that down there?" And I said, "Oh, Liz, they do in fact." Oh, come on down here sometime.
Come to a NASCAR race.
But more specifically, like it came up a couple times. Like, do people still talk about it like this? Yeah, they do. I know old ladies who call it the late unpleasantness. They're not kidding around.
It was a very serious time for down. It was a serious time
for everybody,
for the entire country, but
it hit especially hard the places where the battles were fought, and in the border states in particular, you had people from the same towns fighting from different sides, and a lot of people who fought just because they lived here and they were being invaded, and they didn't own slaves, they didn't care about states' rights, they didn't give a hooey. So you got a lot of interesting brother against brother stuff, and it was very, very complicated. And there's a McDonald's near where I used to live with like a historic marker in the parking lot, and just everywhere you go, it's a battlefield, and so people perceive the South as a place of ghost stories because it kind of is. And
in a country where a lot of our history is washed away,
right?
Everywhere you go down there, you can find a piece of history.
And it's partly because of the fact people talk about the South not being as stable and wealthy as other parts of the nation here and there, present economy notwithstanding. But it is partly true where there isn't as much money, so there isn't as much development, and you end up with the Chattanooga Choo Choo still there after 100. Well, it's only 100 years old now, but you end up with a lot of old buildings that stay just because no one has the money to tear them down. But it's neat.
So it's not necessarily preservation for preservation. No. It's preservation because we don't have the money to knock it down.
Actually, when I first moved to Chattanooga, it was I think 1994, and in that time. I left 3 years ago. But in that time, I saw many when people would raise money, then they would tear the stuff down. And it was kind of frustrating to me. I'm like, no, you should be keeping this. This is interesting and important and good. But you do what you have to do. You make your economy out of what you have at hand. So.
Okay, now getting back to the Edmore, the third and for now
yeah.
final book. Well, we may you
third.
may return at a later
Yeah, I would
time,
love
but
to. We'll see what happens.
For now, talk a little bit about the third and final.
Oh, the
book of
zombies,
Edmore.
the flaming zombies. Yes. They bought 4 and 20 Blackbirds and 2 sequels, but with a pitch on the second, and the third was utterly undetermined. I had no idea, and my husband was like, "Well, you need flaming zombies." So the flaming zombies are for him. We actually blow them up with industrial grade fireworks. It's a lot of fun.
I sent you an email saying how much I love zombies. So anything with zombies, I figure you've got a winner right there. That's the winning formula. Add zombies, whatever else, it's probably going to work.
Well, these are kind of strange zombies. They're actually the result of a terrible hate crime from nearly 100 years ago, where some people were killed and a church was burned down, and the bodies were thrown into the river to hide what had happened. And my wonderful editor, her name's Liz, and she's fantastic, actually sends me an email. She's like, "I never thought I would say this about any given book, but I'd like to see more Klan in this novel." So I'm like, okay, well, more Klan, here we go, more hoods. But I actually got thinking about it because while I was there, before I left, there was some excavation in an old, I think it was originally a bank building from the 19th century, and then a furniture shop, and someone was buying it to turn it into condos or something. But they go upstairs, and they're peeling away the old paneling, and they find an old KKK mural painted on the wall underneath the plaster and stuff. And it was really amateur. It was like, if I were in the KKK, that would embarrass me. But it was, it was just this really terrible artwork of, like, you know, giant hooded figures on horses that looked like they were drawn by sixth graders.
Absurd,
but it was just really bad. And there was a lot of conversation about, should we preserve this or should we do away with it? And you can see both sides. That is not something that you need to remember that it happened, and you can't pretend that this never happened. But do you want to preserve it as a matter of?
It's like Nazi history. How much do you want to glorify such a horrible?
Yeah, what do you do with that?
Period.
And
sure.
I believe they actually ended up painting over them or taking them out. I don't think they kept them. But when this turned up, I was like, wow, we had no idea the Klan ever met up here. And it was right down the street from a church that is very famous in that part of the nation because it was the first integrated church of its kind. And so you have one block that and one block this, and then one block away, the first major newspaper owned by a black family in a town where white people live on the mountains. And, you know, it was just like really, really strictly segregated. But around the second half of the towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th, you finally started to see this coming together. And it was a really volatile period. So I wanted to write a story about that. A terrible accident, a misunderstanding, all these people dead, and one little girl who's practically Rasputin.
Yeah, and it
she
really
just won't die.
It really is a great story. I was disappointed when I had talked with you and then heard that for the time being, there wasn't going to be more, but you were branching onto other stuff and trying some other things. But
I would love to do more, but at the moment, the market dictates.
Yeah, and a really great third story that kind of wraps up the story as right now, so it was definitely very good. But while we've got a few minutes left, as the people start to see this, is it summer or early fall, you're going to have Bone Shaker, your newest fall, so fall of 2009.
Hypothetically before Halloween, we hope.
And that's Bone Shaker, which is your newest. Now, we've talked about, you've done the mysteries, you've done the H.P. Lovecraft, Southern type of horror, you've done the historical horror ghost story.
In a cave.
Now, you're kind of mashing all kinds of stuff together. You've got steampunk, you've got zombies, you said in this, or no, in the future, steampunk and just all kinds of stuff.
There's zombies also in Bone Shaker.
Okay. So,
don't worry, I have your zombie. All your zombie needs are covered, sir.
So why don't you give tell us for a few minutes about Bone Shaker and why people are going to want to pre-order and then go out and buy it when they can.
Bone Shaker is the most fun I've ever had writing anything. I feel like I found my Discworld, if you've ever read Terry Pratchett.
Terry Pratchett.
This is my Discworld. I kind of set an alternate history universe, alternate 1880-ish, called The Clockwork Century, kind of as a loose handle, because Subterranean has published some of it, Tor's going to publish some of it, loose umbrella, Clockwork Century. Basically, in this world, the Civil War has been going on for 20 years. And I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, well, the South would have won if. No, the South would have never won. They just did not have enough people. But if you tweak history here and there a little bit, and I go with the John Scalzi method of adjusting history, as a matter of fact, where it's not one thing that changes it. It's a handful of smaller things that seed and change it. For example, oil was discovered in Texas about 40 years earlier than it really was. Texas is still a republic. It's fueling the Confederacy. And England stayed involved, and Atlanta never burned, and Stonewall Jackson survived. There's a bunch of little things that have kept it in the game. But even the North is running out of people at this point, you know, because immigration is dried up. But anyway, meanwhile, back on the West Coast, where all the trains are kind of gradually finding their way out there. there was a mad scientist and a terrible experiment with a mining machine that created a terrible earthquake in a little frontier town called Seattle. And through the magic of fiction, this gas comes up out of the ground that basically does terrible things to people and ultimately turns them into zombies, but it's a very heavy gas. And they build a wall around the city, and it fills up the wall like a bowl, and it traps all of these dead people in here. And it's very tragic and sad. But really in Seattle there is an underground, but it's because of a fire and has nothing to do with this.
Okay, so you've tweaked history.
Yeah, you know.
Fair enough, fair enough.
For my narrative convenience, yes, we have tweaked history. And it's, underneath there are still people who do survive in this city and who have created their own little society. And the gas itself can be processed into a really terrible drug called the blight. Or the gas is called the blight. The drug is called any number of things. And it's gradually working its way out to the front, back east, and it's becoming a major source of revenue for this depleted, miserable town. Because everyone who survives lives on the outskirts. But the water's poisoned. Just bad things happen everywhere. Zombies and gas and, oh, they're dirigibles. We love dirigibles. But it basically centers around this one woman. She's the widow of the mad scientist who caused all this trouble. And her father was a dead folk hero, and her son has run away, and she has to go into the city looking for her son. And she's helped by air captains, and there's a horrible German scientist who's now living underground and wreaking havoc. And
folks at home, if you don't go buy the book after that, you're not going to want to buy a novel. That's, hey, steampunk, everything you could possibly want. And I know that there's some short stories that exist in Subterranean Press.
Just one. And it's called Tanglefoot.
And that's in the magazine section.
It's online, right.
So they can check that out. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that if any of the stuff you've just heard really interests you, Sherry Priest has an incredible website. You've got the live journal that you do.
That's the same. It cross-posts.
Yeah, it's now cross-post now. And that's been posted throughout the day, but that's sherrypriest.com basically. And
easy to find.
As always, if you have any questions or didn't get everything you want, you can go to the Cult Pop website, and every single author or person we have on is linked from there. But Sherry, it's just always such a joy to have you on. I really sincerely love your work so much.
Thank you so much.
And every time you're around the Midwest area or we're out there,
always happy to see you.
You're welcome on the show. We love your work. One last thing I wanted to say about your newest novel coming out, if you go to SF Signal or some different websites, the cover is posted, and just the most badass cover.
It's so great.
I mean,
I have nothing to do with the cover, so I get to brag on it.
But you know it's going to help with sales, and people are going to say, this is cool, I'll pick it up. Just that,
it's wonderful. Tora has done a really good job with it.
Well, congratulations on all your success.
Oh, the artist is John Foster.
Oh,
I would be remiss if I did not say.
Yes, give him a little plug.
Props to the man.
It really is. And go to the website, check it out, because it's really great looking. Pre-order that book now. But Sherry, thank you as always for taking the time. As I say, I just absolutely love your work, and I wish you continued success.
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome. Folks at home, thank you so much for watching Cult Pop. And as always, if you've got any questions about what you just saw, just go to the website, www.cult-pop.com, or now just the word cultpop.com will get you there, and you can just look up everything you needed. Thanks so much for watching today, and we'll see you next time.
What's it like when you hear your calling? Will you remember where you were? Will you ignore it? Or will you listen? What if it calls you to go halfway around the world? To share your skills, to serve people you've never met, to do things you never thought you could. Peace Corps, life is calling. How far will you go?
Thank you.